Zethkar stood at the observation deck of the battleship Vorthax Pride, watching the stars shift as the massive vessel moved through hyperspace. His forearms rested against the crystalline viewing port, each hand bearing the ceremonial scars of a decorated commander in the Ketherian Imperial Fleet. The purple-scaled warrior had served the Empire for 30 cycles, leading successful campaigns against 17 different species across the galaxy. The bridge communications officer approached with measured steps, his head bowed in the traditional manner of respect. "Commander Zethkar, the War Council's briefing files have arrived from the homeworld." Zethkar accepted the data crystal with one of his lower hands while keeping his primary arms crossed in the stance of authority. The information flowed directly into his neural implants, filling his mind with intelligence reports about their newest target. His vertical pupils dilated as he processed the data about the species called humans. The reports painted a picture of a primitive civilization that had barely managed to crawl beyond their birth planet. These humans had established only a handful of colonies in nearby star systems, using crude chemical rockets and basic fusion engines that were laughably inferior to Ketherian technology. Their weapons appeared to be simple projectile firearms and basic energy weapons that couldn't penetrate even the lightest Ketherian battle armor. "Fascinating," Zethkar muttered, his mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his people. The humans seemed to be nothing more than aggressive mammals with delusions of expansion. The intelligence files showed images of human settlements on worlds designated as New Texas, Haven Colony, and Riverside Station. The buildings were simple metal and concrete structures, lacking the elegant crystal architecture that marked truly advanced civilizations. Their defensive systems consisted of basic missile batteries and energy shields that would collapse under the first wave of Ketherian plasma bombardment, according to the reports. Humans had a curious social structure based on competing nation-states, rather than the unified imperial system that had made the Ketherians so successful. This fragmentation would make them even easier to conquer, as they would likely turn on each other rather than unite against a common threat. Zethkar called his senior staff to the strategy chamber, a circular room where holographic displays could project detailed battle plans. His officers filed in with the precise movements drilled into them through decades of military service. Each wore the dark blue uniform of the Imperial Fleet, with rank insignia that glowed softly in the dim lighting. "Fellow warriors," Zethkar began, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. "We have been granted the honor of eliminating another pest species that dares to expand beyond their rightful boundaries. These humans have spread their crude colonies across 3 star systems, violating the ancient laws of territorial expansion." The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of human space. Red markers indicated military installations, while blue dots showed civilian settlements. The entire human expansion looked pathetically small compared to the vast Ketherian Empire, which controlled over 40 star systems. "Their technology is primitive," continued Zethkar as tactical officer, a scarred veteran named Vorthak. "Our scouts report that their fastest ships require months to travel between systems, while our fleet can cover the same distance in days. Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields, and their armor offers no protection against our plasma cannons." Zethkar nodded approvingly. The Ketherian way of war was elegant and efficient, following codes of conduct that had been refined over thousands of years. A proper campaign began with orbital bombardment to eliminate major defensive positions, followed by ground assaults using disciplined formations of warriors in powered armor. Enemy forces were given opportunities to surrender with honor, and civilian populations were typically spared if they submitted to imperial rule. The War Council estimates that this campaign will require no more than 10 days, Zethkar announced. "We will begin with the mining colony at Riverside Station, which appears to be their most heavily defended position. Once we demonstrate our superiority there, the remaining human settlements will likely surrender without significant resistance." The commander's confidence was shared by his entire staff. They had used these same tactics against the insectoid Skrell, the aquatic Murden, and the crystalline Zeftari. Each species had initially resisted, but all had eventually recognized the futility of fighting the Ketherian Empire and accepted their place as subject peoples. "Sir," asked the communications officer, "what are our rules of engagement regarding human civilians?" "Standard protocols apply," Zethkar replied without hesitation. "Military targets are to be eliminated, but non-combatants who surrender will be processed according to imperial law. We are not barbarians who slaughter helpless populations." The briefing continued for another hour, covering supply lines, reinforcement, schedules, and post-conquest administration. Everything was planned with the methodical precision that had made the Ketherian military machine so effective. Each officer knew his role, each ship had its assigned target, and each phase of the campaign was carefully timed. As the meeting concluded, Zethkar felt the familiar satisfaction of commanding a perfectly prepared military operation. His third assault fleet consisted of 12 heavy cruisers, 36 destroyers, and over 200 support vessels. The human colonies had perhaps a dozen armed ships between them if the intelligence reports were accurate. "Prepare the fleet for combat." "Operations," he ordered. "We will show these humans the price of defying the Empire." The stars continued their ancient dance outside the viewport as the Ketherian fleet moved toward human space, carrying warriors who had never known defeat and commanders who had never encountered an enemy that fought without honor or restraint. The first plasma bolts struck Riverside Station at dawn, turning the mining colony's outer defenses into molten slag within minutes. Zethkar watched from the bridge of his flagship as the orbital bombardment proceeded exactly as planned. Each shot carefully aimed to disable military installations while preserving valuable infrastructure. "Shield generators are down," reported his weapons officer. "Missile batteries eliminated. The humans are attempting to respond with their projectile weapons, but they cannot reach our position." Zethkar observed the pathetic human counterattack through his tactical display. A few crude rockets rose from the colony's surface, exploding harmlessly against his ship's energy shields. The humans had no orbital defenses worth mentioning, just a handful of armed shuttles that his fighters swatted aside like insects. "Commence ground assault," he ordered. "Remember, we follow the code of honor, accept surrenders, protect non-combatants, and minimize unnecessary destruction." The first wave of Ketherian dropships descended through the thin atmosphere, carrying 300 elite warriors in powered armor. Each soldier was equipped with plasma rifles, energy shields, and enough firepower to level a city block. They had fought this same battle dozens of times against other species, and it always ended the same way. The dropships landed in the colony's main plaza, their ramps lowering to reveal ranks of disciplined Ketherian soldiers. The warriors advanced, in perfect formation, their armor gleaming under the alien sun. They expected to find human defenders waiting in organized positions, ready to negotiate surrender terms. Instead, the first Ketherian to step off the ramp triggered a buried explosive device that vaporized him instantly. The blast threw 3 more soldiers backward, their armor cracked and smoking. Before the formation could react, human fighters emerged from hidden positions in the rubble, firing automatic weapons that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Captain Jake Morrison led the human defense from a concealed bunker beneath the colony's main street. He had been a mining engineer before the war, but now he coordinated an attack that violated every principle of civilized warfare that Zethkar understood. The humans had turned their own colony into a death trap, booby-trapping every building and rigging explosives in places where civilians once lived. "They're not fighting like soldiers," Zethkar's ground commander reported over the communications. "Link, they're using tactics that no honorable warrior would employ. They hide among the ruins like scavengers and attack from positions that should be safe zones." The Ketherian soldiers tried to advance using standard urban warfare protocols, but the humans had prepared for exactly this response. Every street corner held a hidden sniper, every building concealed fighters who attacked, and then vanished into tunnel systems that honeycombed the colony's foundation. Sergeant Amy Collins crawled through a ventilation shaft with her left arm, hanging useless from shrapnel wounds. She had been hurt in the first exchange of fire, but instead of seeking medical attention, she positioned herself above a group of Ketherian soldiers who were trying to secure a communications hub. Her rifle had only 6 rounds left, but she waited until the aliens were directly beneath her before opening fire. The attack killed 2 Ketherians and wounded 3 others. But what disturbed Zethkar's forces more was that Collins kept fighting even after taking a plasma bolt to the chest. She used her remaining strength to activate a demolition charge that brought down the entire building, crushing herself along with her enemies. "Sir, we need to withdraw," his ground commander requested. "The humans are using their own structures as weapons. They've poisoned the water supply, contaminated the air recyclers, and turned medical facilities into explosive traps. They're destroying everything rather than let us capture it." Zethkar stared at his tactical display in growing confusion. The humans were behaving like animals, showing no regard for the basic rules that governed warfare between civilized species. They refused to surrender even when facing certain death, instead choosing to fight until their bodies simply stopped functioning. The battle for Riverside Station continued for 18 hours, far longer than any previous Ketherian conquest. The humans had no hope of victory, but they seemed determined to kill as many aliens as possible before dying themselves. They used improvised weapons made from mining equipment, turning industrial tools into instruments of destruction. When the fighting finally ended, Zethkar's forces controlled nothing but rubble and corpses. The humans had systematically destroyed everything of value in the colony, leaving only twisted metal and poisoned ground. The Ketherians had lost over 60% of their assault force, an unthinkable casualty rate for what should have been a simple occupation. "Commander," his medical officer reported, "we've found no wounded humans. They either fought until they died or killed themselves rather than be captured. We've also discovered that they somehow knew exactly where we would land and how we would attack." Zethkar reviewed the battle recordings, trying to understand what had gone wrong. The humans had fought with a savagery that seemed impossible for a sentient species. They showed no concern for their own survival, no respect for the lives of their comrades, and no recognition of the futility of their resistance. The most disturbing discovery came when his soldiers found Captain Morrison's body in the ruins of the command bunker. The human had been fatally wounded hours before the battle ended, but he had continued directing the defense until his heart finally stopped. His last act had been to activate a final explosive device that killed 6 Ketherian soldiers who were trying to recover intelligence files. "Prepare the fleet for departure," Zethkar ordered. "We will proceed to the next target as planned." But as his ships lifted away from the smoking remains of Riverside Station, the commander felt something he had never experienced before in 30 cycles of warfare. For the first time in his military career, Zethkar was beginning to fear his enemy. 3 weeks after the disaster at Riverside Station, Zethkar's fleet approached the agricultural world of Green Valley. The planet was supposed to be lightly defended, populated mostly by farmers and food processing workers who would have little stomach for the kind of savage fighting they had encountered at the mining colony. The orbital scans showed vast fields of grain and vegetable crops stretching across 3 continents, with small cities scattered throughout the fertile valleys. Intelligence reports indicated that Green Valley supplied food to 6 other human colonies, making it a valuable target that the humans would surely want to preserve. "Sir, we're detecting unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface," reported the sensor operator. "The readings don't match any known human technology, but they're definitely artificial." Zethkar studied the data with growing concern. His forces had been reinforced since Riverside Station, but the memory of that brutal battle haunted every warrior in the fleet. The humans had fought with a cruelty that went beyond anything in Ketherian experience, turning their own homes into death traps. "Begin standard bombardment of military installations," he ordered, "but maintain higher altitude than usual." These humans seemed to enjoy their surprises. The plasma beams lanced down from orbit, striking the few visible defensive positions with precision strikes. The response was immediate and terrifying. Instead of the expected return fire, The humans activated whatever they had been preparing during the weeks since the first attack. Colonel Pete Williams had been expecting the Ketherian assault ever since the news from Riverside Station reached Green Valley. Unlike the mining colony, his world had time to prepare something special for their alien visitors. Williams had been a biochemist before the war, and he understood exactly how to use his knowledge as a weapon. The strange energy signatures that Zethkar's sensors had detected were biological warfare laboratories hidden beneath the agricultural facilities. For weeks, human scientists had been working around the clock to create something that would specifically target Ketherian physiology. They had samples of alien blood and tissue from the Riverside Station battle, and they had used that genetic material to engineer a nightmare. "Release the packages," Williams ordered from his underground command center. "All stations, implement Protocol 7 immediately." Across the planet's surface, concealed missile launchers fired canisters into the upper atmosphere. The projectiles were designed to break apart at high altitude, releasing their contents as an invisible cloud that would drift down onto any Ketherian forces that tried to land. The first dropships descended through the contaminated air without detecting any immediate threat. The biological weapon was odorless and invisible, designed to pass through the standard filters on Ketherian breathing apparatus. It took effect within minutes of exposure, causing massive organ failure as the engineered virus attacked the alien's unique cellular structure. "Ground Force Alpha is reporting medical emergencies," the communications officer announced with barely controlled panic. "Multiple casualties, cause unknown. The soldiers are collapsing inside their armor." Zethkar watched in horror as his tactical display showed dozens of his warriors falling unconscious or dying within minutes of landing. The humans had somehow created a weapon that specifically targeted his species, something that should have been impossible without years of genetic research. "Recall all ground forces immediately," he commanded. "Full planetary sterilization protocols. We will burn this world to ash." But the humans had prepared for this response as well. As the Ketherian fleet moved into position for a full orbital bombardment, Admiral Lisa Rodriguez activated the second phase of her defense plan. She had been preparing for this moment since the first reports of alien contact reached human space, and she had made sure that Green Valley would not die quietly. The agricultural world had been turned into a massive trap. Hidden beneath the farm fields were hundreds of nuclear weapons, all connected to a centralized detonation system. If the humans could not keep their world, they would make sure that the aliens gained nothing from its destruction. "All civilians have been evacuated to the deep shelters," Rodriguez reported to the colony's governing council. "We can maintain life support for approximately 6 months underground. The surface installations are ready for total destruction." When the Ketherian bombardment began, the humans waited until the alien fleet was fully committed to the attack. The plasma beams turned cities into molten glass and forests into burning wastelands, but they also triggered the hidden nuclear arsenal that lay buried beneath the planet's surface. The explosions were visible from orbit as massive mushroom clouds rose into the atmosphere. The humans had detonated nuclear weapons in their own population centers, destroying everything that the Ketherians might have wanted to capture. The agricultural facilities, the processing plants, the infrastructure that made Green Valley valuable, all of it vanished in nuclear fire. "Sir, we're detecting massive radiation levels across the entire planet," the sensor operator reported. "The humans have made their world uninhabitable for the next 1,000 years. Zethkar stared at the glowing radioactive wasteland that had once been Green Valley. The humans had chosen to destroy their own world rather than let it fall into alien hands. They had killed their own people, poisoned their own soil, and turned a paradise into a dead rock floating in space. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface," the communications officer announced. "It's coming from the deep shelters." The message was simple and direct. Admiral Rodriguez's voice echoed through the bridge of the Ketherian flagship, carrying a promise that chilled every warrior who heard it. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Green Valley. Defense Force, we want you to remember this world every time you look at a human colony. We want you to understand that we would rather die than serve you. We would rather burn our own worlds than let you have them. Come to our next colony if you want, but know that we will be waiting with something even worse." The transmission ended, leaving Zethkar alone with his thoughts as the fleet departed from the radioactive tomb that had once been Green Valley. The humans had escalated their brutality beyond anything he could have imagined, and he was beginning to understand that this war would not end the way he had expected. 6 months had passed since the nuclear devastation of Green Valley, and Zethkar found himself facing an enemy that defied every logical expectation. Instead of being weakened by their losses, the humans seemed to be growing stronger with each defeat. Intelligence reports flooded in from across human space, describing developments that should have been impossible for such a primitive species. The humans were reverse engineering captured Ketherian technology with a speed that horrified the empires. Military scientists. At the industrial colony of New Pittsburgh, human engineers had somehow managed to modify a crashed Ketherian destroyer, stripping away its safety systems and pushing the alien engines beyond their design limits. The result was a weapon that could outrun anything in the Imperial fleet, even if it killed its crew through radiation exposure. General Rick Carter stood in the rebuilt command center on Haven Colony, studying holographic displays that showed modified Ketherian ships under human control. His engineering teams had worked for months to understand the alien technology, often dying from exposure to exotic energies that their bodies could not handle. But for every engineer who perished, 2 more volunteers took their place. "Sir, the modified vessels are ready for combat trials," reported his chief engineer, a woman whose hair had turned white from radiation exposure during the reverse engineering process. "We've increased engine output by 40%, but life support systems will fail after 6 hours of operation." Carter nodded grimly. The humans had learned to accept casualties that would horrify any other species. They treated their own lives as expendable resources, throwing away trained personnel to gain even minor advantages against their alien enemies. "Deploy the fleet," he ordered. "Target the Ketherian supply convoys in the Vega system. Remember, we're not trying to win this battle. We're trying to make them pay for every inch of space they occupy." The human counterattack struck 3 days later, catching a Ketherian logistics fleet completely off guard. The modified alien ships appeared without warning, their overcharged engines allowing them to close the distance before the Imperial forces could respond. The battle was brief and vicious, with human crews deliberately ramming their vessels into Ketherian ships when their weapons ran out. Zethkar received the battle reports with growing unease. The humans had lost all 5 of their attack vessels, but they had destroyed or damaged 12 Imperial ships in the process. More disturbing was the discovery that human boarding parties had captured critical navigation data before sacrificing themselves in suicide attacks. "Sir, we're detecting human transmission signals from the Trinity Station sector," his communications officer reported. "The signals are very weak, but they appear to be coming from the colony that was cut off 4 months ago." Trinity Station had been completely surrounded by Ketherian forces, with no possibility of resupply or reinforcement. The colony's 3,000 inhabitants should have surrendered or died from starvation weeks ago. Instead, Commander Helen Burke had somehow kept her garrison alive through methods that challenged every assumption about human behavior. When relief forces finally reached Trinity Station, they found a colony that had been transformed into something that haunted even hardened soldiers. The humans had resorted to cannibalism to survive, carefully rationing the bodies of their dead to sustain the living. Medical officers had established protocols for determining which wounded personnel could be saved and which should be used as food sources. "We maintained military discipline throughout the siege," Burke reported to her superiors with the same calm professionalism she might use to discuss supply schedules. "We preserved enough personnel to maintain defensive positions while maximizing nutritional efficiency." Morale remained high because everyone understood the mission requirements. The most disturbing aspect of the Trinity Station siege was not the cannibalism itself, but the systematic way the humans had organized it. They had established rotation schedules, nutritional guidelines, and even rank-based priorities for food distribution. The colony had become a machine for converting human bodies into continued resistance. Zethkar studied the intelligence reports with growing horror. The humans were not just willing to die for their cause, they were willing to consume their own dead to continue fighting. They had turned their biological needs into another weapon, using their own mortality as fuel for their war machine. Meanwhile, human forces throughout occupied space were learning to predict Ketherian tactical responses. The aliens' rigid military doctrine, which had served them well against other species, became a liability against enemies who studied every pattern and prepared specific counters for each standard maneuver. At the Battle of Proxima Station, human forces under Commander Helen Burke demonstrated their new understanding of Ketherian psychology. They deliberately retreated from defensive positions, knowing that Imperial forces would advance using their standard formation patterns. The humans had prepared elaborate traps that exploited the aliens' predictable responses, turning their military efficiency against them. "They're learning faster than we are," Zethkar confided to his senior staff during a strategy meeting. "Every time we adapt our tactics, they develop new counters within weeks. It's as if they treat every defeat as a learning opportunity rather than a setback." The psychological impact on Ketherian forces was becoming impossible to ignore. Warriors, who had served with distinction for decades, were requesting transfers away from human combat zones. Medical officers reported increasing cases of what they called human syndrome, a condition where soldiers became unable to function after witnessing the extremes of human warfare. "Sir, we're receiving reports of Imperial personnel refusing orders to participate in ground assaults," his intelligence officer reported quietly. "The troops are saying that fighting humans is not honorable combat, but something else entirely." Zethkar knew that his forces were beginning to break under the strain of fighting an enemy that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The humans had revealed themselves as a species that could not be defeated through conventional means, because they refused to accept any concept of acceptable losses or reasonable limits to their resistance. The Battle of Kepler Station would become the turning point that ended Zethkar's faith in Imperial victory. The massive space station orbited a dying star at the edge of human space, serving as the primary supply hub for 3 entire colonial sectors. If the Ketherians could capture it intact, they would control the resources needed to sustain their expansion into human territory. Zethkar commanded the largest fleet ever assembled for a single operation: 47 heavy cruisers, 100, and 30 destroyers and over 300 support vessels. The Armada represented nearly half of the Empire's total military strength, gathered for what the War Council believed would be the decisive battle of the campaign. Intelligence reports indicate that Admiral Tony Martinez has assumed command of the station's defenses, his tactical officer reported. "Human reinforcements have been arriving for weeks, but their total strength is still less than 1/10 of our forces." The space station itself was a massive structure, nearly 20 kilometers long and housing over 2 million civilians along with military personnel. Its defensive systems had been upgraded with captured Ketherian technology, but even the improved weapons could not match the firepower of an entire Imperial fleet. Admiral Martinez stood in the station's command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing the approaching alien armada. He had been expecting this moment since the war began, and he had spent months preparing a defense that would demonstrate the true nature of human warfare to any survivors. "All civilian evacuation pods are away," reported his operations officer. "The non-combatants have been moved to the inner system aboard freighters and medical ships." Martinez nodded, but his attention was focused on the massive cargo bays that had been converted into something that would have horrified the Ketherian commanders if they had known what was coming. The humans had filled the station with their own wounded soldiers, veterans who had been too damaged to fight but were still willing to die for their cause. "Initiate Lazarus Protocol," Martinez ordered. "All medical bay patients are to be prepared for final deployment." The Lazarus Protocol was humanity's most desperate innovation, a system that turned dying soldiers into living weapons. Wounded personnel who could no longer fight effectively were equipped with high-explosive devices and neural stimulants that would keep them conscious long enough to complete suicide missions. The Ketherian fleet opened fire from maximum range, their plasma beams striking the station's outer hull with devastating effect. Armor plating vaporized under the intense heat, and atmosphere vented from dozens of breaches. The humans responded with their own weapons, but the return fire was clearly insufficient to stop the massive alien assault. "Sir, the station's shields are failing," reported Zethkar's weapons officer. Estimated time to complete structural collapse is 6 hours. But as the bombardment continued, something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to repair the damage, the humans began deliberately destroying their own station. Explosive charges detonated throughout the structure, turning defensive positions into death traps and eliminating anything that might be useful to the attacking fleet. Major Kate Thompson led the first wave of boarding parties from the human side, using specially modified shuttles to reach the Ketherian ships while the main battle continued. Her teams consisted entirely of volunteers who had already accepted death as the price of their mission. They carried no supplies, no medical equipment, and no plans for retreat. Thompson's shuttle crashed directly into the hangar bay of Zethkar's flagship, the impact killing half her team instantly. The survivors fought their way through the ship using improvised weapons and savage determination that left alien crew members fleeing in terror. When their ammunition ran out, they used pieces of debris as clubs and their own bodies as weapons. "Intruders on decks 7 through 12, reported Zethkar's security chief. "They're not trying to capture anything, sir. They're just destroying everything they can reach before they die." The human boarding action spread throughout the Ketherian fleet as damaged shuttles and escape pods deliberately crashed into alien vessels. Each boarding party fought with the knowledge that they would not survive, focusing entirely on killing as many enemies as possible before their own deaths. Chris Parker had been a mechanic before the war, but radiation exposure from working with captured alien technology had given him only weeks to live. He volunteered for the final boarding mission, carrying enough explosives to destroy a cruiser's engine room. Parker fought his way through 3 decks of Ketherian defenders, using his dying body to shield the detonator from enemy fire. "Tell my family I kept the engine running," he whispered into his communicator before triggering the explosives that gutted the alien warship. The battle continued for 18 hours, far longer than any Ketherian operation had ever lasted. The humans used their own wounded as ammunition, crashed damaged ships into enemy vessels, and turned every defeat into an opportunity to inflict casualties on their attackers. When the fighting finally ended, Zethkar's fleet had technically won the battle. Kepler Station was a floating ruin, its 2 million inhabitants dead or scattered. But the victory had cost the Empire over 60% of its assault force, losses that could not be replaced quickly enough to continue the war. "Sir, casualty reports are coming in from all ship commanders," his aide reported with barely controlled emotion. "We've lost 21 heavy cruisers, 74 destroyers, and over 200 support vessels. Total personnel losses exceed 400,000. Zethkar stared at the tactical display, watching the debris field that had once been humanity's greatest space station. The humans had lost everything, but they had made the price of victory so high that the Empire could not afford another such triumph. The war had reached its turning point, and for the first time in his military career, Zethkar understood that his side might not win. 40 years had passed since the ceasefire agreement was signed on the neutral world of Centauri Prime, and Zethkar sat in his study overlooking the crystal gardens of his retirement estate. His forearms moved slowly across the writing tablet, recording the memories that still haunted his dreams after all these decades. The war had ended not with victory or defeat, but with exhaustion and horror that left both species forever changed. The Ketherian Empire had agreed to the ceasefire not because they could not continue fighting, but because they could no longer bear the cost of fighting humans. The Battle of Kepler Station had broken something fundamental in the Imperial military, a psychological barrier that could never be rebuilt. When the War Council reviewed the casualty reports and realized that humanity would make them pay the same price for every victory, they chose to end the conflict rather than face total annihilation. The humans did not defeat us through superior technology or better tactics, Zethkar wrote in his memoir. They defeated us by proving that they were willing to sacrifice everything for their freedom, including their own lives, their own worlds, and their own future. They showed us that some species cannot be conquered because they refuse to accept the concept of surrender. The old warrior paused in his writing, remembering the final days of the war when both sides had been reduced to automated weapons platforms fighting in empty space. The humans had evacuated their remaining colonies and turned them into massive weapons designed to kill as many Ketherians as possible. Even their civilian populations had been militarized, with children learning to use explosives and elderly citizens volunteering for suicide missions. The peace negotiations had been unlike anything in galactic history. The human delegates led by Admiral Tony Martinez had refused to discuss terms of surrender or occupation. Instead, they had presented a simple ultimatum: the Ketherian Empire would withdraw from all human space, or the war would continue until one species was extinct. "We cannot be ruled by others," Martinez had told the Ketherian negotiators. "We cannot be enslaved, conquered, or absorbed into your empire. We would rather die as free beings than live as your subjects. If you want to destroy us, you will have to kill every single human in existence, and we will make sure that costs you everything you have." The Empire had tried to call the human bluff, launching one final assault on the colony world of New Houston. The humans had responded by turning the entire planet into a nuclear wasteland, killing all 3 million inhabitants rather than let them fall into alien hands. The message was clear: humanity would commit genocide against itself before accepting foreign rule. Zethkar remembered the shocked silence in the War Council chambers when the reports from New Houston arrived. The humans had proven that they were not making empty threats. They possessed the psychological makeup to destroy their own species rather than submit to conquest. "The human concept of total war was something beyond our comprehension," he continued writing. "They did not fight to win territory or resources, but to preserve their freedom to exist as independent beings. They treated death as an acceptable price for liberty, a trade-off that no other species we had encountered could make." The years following the ceasefire had been difficult for both civilizations. The Ketherian Empire had withdrawn into isolation, its military doctrine shattered by the encounter with humanity. Entire generations of warriors had been traumatized by fighting an enemy that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The Empire's expansion had ended permanently, as no other species seemed worth the risk of another human-style conflict. Humanity had emerged from the war transformed as well. The colonies that survived had been militarized beyond recognition, their populations trained from birth to resist foreign invasion. Human technology had advanced rapidly through their study of captured Ketherian equipment, but their society had been scarred by the sacrifices they had made to preserve their independence. The most disturbing aspect of human warfare was not their cruelty or their willingness to die, Zethkar wrote. It was their ability to maintain hope and determination even in the face of certain defeat. They fought harder when they were losing than when they were winning. They grew stronger through suffering in ways that defied all logic. The old commander set down his writing tablet and walked to the window overlooking his garden. The crystal formations grew in perfect geometric patterns, following natural laws that had remained unchanged for millions of years. Everything in Ketherian society followed similar patterns of order and predictability, which was why they had been unable to understand an enemy that thrived on chaos and sacrifice. What kind of species creates warriors who fight more fiercely when they are dying than when they are healthy? He had written in his final chapter. What kind of civilization breeds soldiers who smile as they pull the trigger on a bomb that will kill them along with their enemies? What kind of people choose to destroy their own worlds rather than let others rule them? The questions had haunted him for decades, and he was no closer to understanding the answers than he had been during the war. Humanity remained an enigma to the Ketherian mind. A species that had evolved psychological traits that seemed designed specifically for warfare. Against superior opponents, the memoir would serve as both warning and educational tool for future generations of Ketherian leaders. It documented humanity's unique approach to conflict, their willingness to use suffering as a weapon, and their complete refusal to accept defeat under any circumstances. We learn that there are some enemies who cannot be conquered because they have already accepted the ultimate price of freedom, Zethkar concluded his writing. The humans taught us that victory means nothing if the cost exceeds what you are willing to pay. They showed us that the most dangerous opponent is not the one with the best weapons, but the one who has nothing left to lose. The sun set over the Crystal Gardens as the old warrior finished his final entry, creating a record that would ensure future generations understood the true nature of the species that had brought the mighty Ketherian Empire to its knees through sheer, brutal determination.